This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. Rundown! Good morning. I am Carrie Saldo. It is July 10th. America and Massachusetts celebrated 250 years over the weekend. Soccer fans saw the 7th and final World Cup match played between in Massachusetts at Gillette Stadium yesterday. France and Morocco faced off. France bested Morocco 2-0. My goal today, oh yeah, sparking your interest in this week's local news that you can use. Our shimmering lineup of panelists this morning: Greta Yoakum, investigations editor at the Springfield Republican newspaper; Mike Dobbs of Focus Springfield; and Paul Tudhill, reporter emeritus. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone.
Good morning.
Glad to have you here. If you have thoughts at home, you can email therundown@nepm.org, and be sure to check out our YouTube live stream. All right, that business is finished. Now we're going to dive in. There's a lot to talk about this morning. The news we're going to begin with, reported by Jeanette DeForge. Springfield developers file lawsuit to block courthouse selection. A highly anticipated announcement here in Western Massachusetts. It came down on July 2nd. And before we get into the lawsuit, a little bit of scaffolding to hang our conversation on. You know, this project was sparked by a long-standing human health concerns as well as maintenance issues at the Roderick Ireland Courthouse. Years, really, of debate and discussion about what to do, and it was decided that a new courthouse is needed. And the state sort of changed its model here. Not sort of, it did change its model here and went out and said, private developers, we want you to come in and build what we need. We'll lease the space back to you. Previously, the model used by the state is they owned and operated their courthouses, right? So a big change here with this proposal, and the planned lease will be 40 years with an option to extend, so as much as 60 years of a lease that folks are looking at here. And as I said, July 2nd, it was announced Liberty Junction, an out-of-town developer, was selected to build an almost 250,000 square foot courthouse at 125 Liberty Street in Springfield. Also, 2 parking garages and some other development adjacent to the site is planned there. Quoting Jeanette's work, a pair of local business moguls who unsuccessfully submitted separate bids to build the new courthouse filed a lawsuit together demanding the state vacate its unpopular decision of selecting an out-of-town developer and ban the group from the process in the future. City business owners James Belize and Dinesh Patel filed the case in Hampden Superior Court, alleging one of the principals of Liberty Junction, which submitted the winning bid, had a conflict of interest and therefore should be excluded from this process. That person is John Barros, who is one of the developers, but is also currently serving as the interim director of the Massachusetts Convention Center Authority. So a lot of threads here. Paul Tudhill, where are you landing on this?
Well, yeah, you're right. There are a lot of threads here. The lawsuit explains that that DCAM, which made the decision on the courthouse project, is a division of the state's Executive Office of Administration and Finance. The head of that office sits on the board of directors of the Convention Center Authority. So it's kind of an exercise in connect the dots. Where there's smoke, there's fire, and I guess ultimately the question is going to come down to is there substance in this litigation, or is it just sour grapes?
Yeah, and there were 11 different competing proposals, a lot of real estate in play here, a lot of local developers. Mayor Sarno came out and made no bones about the fact that he was not very pleased with the fact that an outside developer was selected. He had made it pretty clear that he favored some local development along the waterfront in Springfield. That was Peter Picknelly's proposal.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
In fact, Sarno's well-publicized quote from the press conference in reaction to the announcement of the courthouse project is that once again, Boston power brokers are telling the city of Springfield what to do. Local developers were shunned. That quote was included in the paperwork on the lawsuit that was filed. And there's no question that Barros is a Boston power broker. He's had a long history in development for a nonprofit. He was the city's chief development officer in the Marty Walsh administration. His real estate partner is the husband of U.S. Representative Presley.
Yeah,
so
Ayanna Presley,
there's no
that's right.
question he's connected.
Well, and also, I could hear Liberty Junction declined to comment, according to Jeanette's reporting. But I could hear John Barrow saying, look, I was only tapped to lead the Convention Center Authority in January. These proposals were cooking long before that.
However, on July 1st, on the day they found out that they were the winning bidder, he filed a statement with the State Ethics Commission where he asserted that he is a passive investor in this project with no decision-making authority. He obviously knew that there was an issue that needed to be resolved.
Mike, DCAM said for its part, and that's the Division of Capital and Management and Maintenance, the state agency that's overseeing this process, that the downtown location near public transit, that's why Liberty Junction was selected, the team's development experience, the lowest cost submitted of all bids, and one of the fastest project delivery schedules. The courthouse would open around 2030. What do you make of this?
Oh, there's so much to make about this. You know, I find it fascinating. We always want to complain about state projects becoming more expensive. And here's a state project that was selected in part because it was the least expensive proposal. So somehow that offended people. The fact of the matter is that there was a lot of power players in this. I mean, James Belize, Peter Picknelly, these are power players. They're power players not only in economic development, they're power players behind the scenes in politics. And the fact that the local guys didn't get the nod here, I mean, I think they're really going to have to go to a great extent in their lawsuit to prove somehow that Liberty Junction was deficient in meeting the requirements of the RFP. Because honestly, I mean, I looked at the lawsuit, and one of the issues they had was the news dump on July 2nd. And it was like, well, they tried to sneak this past us. And I thought, well, this is pretty disingenuous. This is the biggest story Western Massachusetts has had for a while. It doesn't really matter, quote unquote, if they tried to sneak it past people. Everyone's going to get that press release and they're going to react.
But is it interesting that we haven't heard much from the governor on this? I did reach out to the governor's office for comment on Wednesday. I didn't hear back at all. I reached out to DCAM with some questions on Wednesday. In fact, one of them about the potential conflict of interest with Barrows. DCAM on Thursday declined to comment because of the litigation. But this is, to your point, probably the biggest economic development we have seen in Western Massachusetts since the casino,
right,
at least.
Yep.
And we're not hearing much from the governor, Greta. Were you thinking about that? What are you thinking about in this?
Yeah, I did think it was a little odd that they chose July 2nd, just right ahead of a holiday weekend. Sort of a strange time. Why not wait a week if you've already waited months past the original kind of deadline that they were going to, put the decision out, but they got so many good proposals. They said it took longer. I mean, with the lawsuit, I guess it'll be interesting to see how much that slows the project down, because the whole point of this project is that the current courthouse is a building that seems to be making people very ill. And some of that's been remedied in the short term, but I think
some staffers have been, or not working, staff of Coakley Rivera's office, the Registry of Deeds, haven't been working in there for some time.
Yeah, and there's been some remediation of the building in the short term, but I think that's the whole point of this. So hopefully it doesn't slow things down too much for, the people that have to work in that building, every day.
Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, no, go ahead, make your...
No, it's just more questions for me, right? What happens to all this real estate that was brought up as part of this, right? Mike, you and I were talking about this earlier this week.
Not to plug myself, but I will. I do a weekly column for Medium on local topics, and when I wrote about the courthouse, what I wrote about was, okay, that's one story, but here's the other story. What is going to happen to Jeb Belize's cleared property downtown? What's going to happen to the former Mardi Gras building? What's going to happen to any of these locations in terms of future economic development?
And many of these owned by separate real estate groups that have been formed specifically to hopefully win the bid for the courthouse.
I mean, preservationists in Springfield are very upset that the, for lack of a better term, the absorbing junior building is gone. It's a historic a building that the Historic Commission had to sign off on its demolition. So I think that's actually the companion story that may be in the long run even have more impact in economic development, because you do have these parcels that they need to do something with, and we don't know what they're going to do with them.
Just one thought that I had when I saw that a lawsuit had been filed. I was reminded that roughly a year ago, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation awarded a massive contract to redevelop and operate 18 highway service plazas. That contract was awarded to Applegreen of Dublin, Ireland. A Massachusetts company, Global Partners of Waltham, sued, claiming that they had discovered texts and emails that indicated there had been improper communications between MassDOT officials and the winning developer during the bidding process. Global also waged this extensive public relations campaign with paid advertising, social media, media appearances, in which they made the argument that their proposal was demonstrably better for Massachusetts taxpayers than the bid that MassDOT picked. 2 months later, the successful bidder, Applegreen, dropped out of the project, saying that the threat of protracted litigation would mess up the financials for it. And so now MassDOT has literally gone back to the drawing board, and they're in the process of issuing a new RFP to rebid this project. So is there a blueprint for what's happening with the courthouse project? I would say that what happened last year with the MassDOT situation is a possible blueprint to success here, at least for people who want to overturn the winning bid.
Lots of questions, lots of things to look at. Next steps here, there will be a hearing on this lawsuit. It's been moved, the whole case has been moved to Berkshire County because it would be a little funny to have judges in the Roderick Ireland courthouse complex weighing in on this issue. So out to Berkshire County, no hearing date was set as of yesterday. All right, there was a debate this week in Western Massachusetts. Markey and Moulton traded barbs over experience, healthcare, and first debate. That was the headline on another story by Jeanette DeForge from the Springfield Republican this week. She wrote, while Senator Edward Markey said his experience will help fight and push out conservative Republicans from power, his rival Representative Seth Moulton argued repeatedly the old way isn't working now and won't in the future. Much of the first debate of the Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate on Wednesday came down to who was more fit to hold the seat and fight off the ideas of President Trump and his Make America Great Again followers. Markey said he wants to be one more term to try to finish his agenda, while Moulton, 47, argued it's time for a new voice to try new strategies. The debate, hosted by WWLP, was broadcast live. There were panelists from the Republican, New England Public Radio, Media, us, and Western Mass News, NEPM's executive editor for news, Elizabeth Roman. Shout out for great work on that panel.
Yes.
Mike Dobbs, you were at the debate.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Okay.
Well, what did you take away?
What did I take away? I think...
Because I think what we're seeing from Markey Moulton, not entirely new playbook, right? When people are challenging sitting incumbents, this is a familiar thing that we hear. But was there anything different that you heard?
I think that this is a reflection of the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. What is a Democrat these days is going to be, I think, further updated in the election process across the country. And so I thought they were solidifying a lot of their stands. And you just briefly talked about their stands, and I think Markey is going to hammer down on I'm 80, or I'm going to be 80 very soon, but I've got the experience to get stuff done. Just ask all these mayors across the Commonwealth. They have a problem, they call me up, I take care of it. And Moulton is trying to fit into this mold of, okay, if you send me to the Senate, this means, and he has said this very frankly, he said, I'm going to get rid of Chuck Schumer. We need new directions. So I really think you see in this race sort of what's happening in other Democratic races across the country, where it is age/experience versus, look, we need a new playbook. We have to have a new playbook.
The interesting thing, though, with these other races across the country that you referenced is that in those other races, in those other mostly these have been House primaries, what we're seeing is young progressive Democrats knocking off older establishment Democrats. In this case, you've got an older establishment Democrat who's also a progressive. And I, that is kind of a very different dynamic in this race than what we're seeing across the country. I will say, I think, the public polling has shown that this race is tightened
very
up.
tight.
Markey had a big lead at the beginning. Now, largely I think that was due to name recognition, and now Moulton has managed to close that. And I think the indication that this race is getting closer was signaled right off the bat when Markey in his opening statement went right on the attack. Obviously he doesn't feel he has to introduce himself to voters the way Moulton did in his opening statement, but Markey was right on the attack against Moulton right from the beginning, and I think that's an indicator that this race really is very, very tight, very close.
Greta, one takeaway for you before we head to break here.
Just a small thing I liked. The East-West rail I know maybe comes up a lot, but I liked that.
Sort of like the cliche de facto, we talked about Western Massachusetts and
yeah,
Western Massachusetts question.
But I did like that Moulton was talking about how slow it would be, because I think that's something like how long it would take to get from east to west, which I think is a huge problem. If I'm not going to commute almost 2 hours to Boston, I don't think most people would on a train.
Something that will have to be looked at as they look at that schedule. All right, still ahead here to come on the rundown. Should Massachusetts ban so-called PFAS chemicals? Plus, we'll debut a new segment, the Rundown Rewind, where we catch up on news that we missed recently. You're listening to the Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. Stay with us.
The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown here at 88.5 NEPM and streaming live on YouTube. If you want to join the party, email therundown@nepm.org. I'm joined again by journalist Greta Yoakum, Mike Dobbs, and Paul Tuthill. Let's get back to it. Our new segment, as I talked about right before the break, the Rundown Rewind, where I turn back time and cover news that I somehow accidentally missed.
Back when I was a reporter. No, it's just...
So in early June, Greta, you reported on the State Inspector General, Jeffrey Shapiro, releasing a final report relative to the state sheriff's budgets. And this was a 200-page report, which followed a preliminary report out in February, which we talked about back then. It called the budgeting process for the sheriff's department deeply flawed and flagged an impending financial crisis. You reported in June, as I mentioned. Can you give us some backstory before we really dig into this?
Yeah, so last year, at the end of last year, sheriffs came back to the legislature, as they do typically every year, and asked for more money to plug budget holes. So they do that typically every year, but last year they asked for more money than they ever had before, and that sort of sent off some alarm bells for legislators. There was pushback and questions about why they needed all this money. And that led to the Inspector General's report, or, commissioning that report that came months later.
And it found that Hampden County really needed the most money, right? $26 million on top of the $102 million the state initially allocated. But the report found that Hampden County actually is being underfunded. So what specifically did it zero in on?
Yeah, it found that there were so many findings in this report. It found that they were underfunded in some ways, but other ways not. So the underfunding was for the Section 35 facility, which is for drug treatment, court-ordered drug treatment. and also for the Chicopee Women's Jail, which is the only women's jail in Western Massachusetts in Hampden County, but it serves all the counties. It found that it wasn't the state wasn't giving those programs sufficient funding, but it also found, like other sheriff's offices, that they were, overspending in other places, and then coming back for more money at the end of the year.
Hampden County Sheriff Nick Kochi said in a statement, "The report confirms what we have been saying for years. The Hampden County Sheriff's Office is responsible for providing several unique regional and statewide services that extend far beyond the traditional operation of a county correctional facility." Paul, I think you were on the show when we talked about the preliminary report. What do you make of this final?
I was. Well, I'll say that I think I made the point back in February that one of the points that Inspector General Shapiro raised in his preliminary report was that that sheriffs, including the Hampden County Sheriff, were getting into operations where their authority to do so was somewhat murky. Things like horse patrols in Forest Park or patrolling Union Station.
Both of which they've ceased operation of since.
They've ceased now, because the question was, what really is the role of the sheriff in Massachusetts? Can they go out and pull speeders over on the highways? Can they arrest people? There were a lot of legalities here that Shapiro touched on. As far as the money issues go, the big thing that he flagged too was that the way this system had worked for years was the sheriffs were being allowed to deficit spend. And again, there's nothing in the state finance law that gives sheriffs the authority to deficit spend. So now we have a new budget passed last week by the legislature, signed yesterday by Governor Healy, and hopefully this corrects all of this problem now.
We'll see. It was interesting that you pointed out, Greta, that there was not a consensus on the sheriff's department role in the overspending. And to me, wasn't that a large point of the report? I was just kind of left scratching my head on that one.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there was just so many different elements to it. For example, like the underfunding of some things in Hampden County, but overspending in other places. And like Paul was saying, sort of the core question of what is a sheriff's office, what are their responsibilities, and what should they be.
Mike Dobbs, you're a longtime reporter here in the region. You've written various stories about the sheriff's departments. What do you make of this?
What I make about it is that it's sort of fascinating that the gravy train is going to be screeching to a halt here. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times the role of the Hampden County Sheriff, and this was with Sheriff Ash as with Sheriff Kochi, is that they have taken on various programs and responsibilities that certainly are part of law enforcement. You mentioned the horse patrols in Forest Park, the Union Station stuff. And it's almost like, well, did they add these responsibilities knowing that they had the money for it in the budget? If the process has been, let's do something good, and I'm not saying that horse patrols in Forest Park is a bad thing, it's a good thing, but do they have the money for it in the budget to begin with? And there's a line here, I read part of the report, and it says, what is abundantly clear is that their role, sheriff's role, is not as narrow as some legislative leaders expect and not as expansive as some sheriffs believe. So I think that out of all this, somebody's got to do a job description for the sheriff. What does being a sheriff, leading a sheriff's department actually mean? And it should mean essentially the same thing for every sheriff across the Commonwealth.
Next steps here, Greta, what are you watching for?
I think we'll be watching how this year's, like you said, Paul, the budget was signed yesterday by the governor, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out this year. Will sheriffs overspend as much as they did last year and come back for more money? Will they, keep it in check? And how will the cuts play out in Hampden County, which they've announced for sort of the extra sort of patrols of Forest Park and Union Station?
Well, to be continued on that. Moving on to our next topic, an opinion piece that was in Commonwealth Beacon this week. Headline, it's time to act on the state's PFAS problem. Massachusetts is the only New England state that has not banned these toxic chemicals. And I'll give a little detail on that. There are other moves afoot that some PFAS, these so-called forever chemicals, such as in firefighting foam and some other firefighting elements, are set to be banned in 2027. But as in terms of an entire ban, we've seen several New England states stepping forth and saying by X year, these have to be completely banned. This was a piece by Connor Reed, who's the town administrator in Westwood and former town administrator in Easton. And that's important because the water there was exceeding those allowable levels, the 20 parts per trillion that the state now regulates in water, saying that these chemicals, anything above that, is detrimental to human health. And his part reads, quote, today, 176 public water systems in 99 cities and towns across the Commonwealth have exceeded the state's legal limit for PFAS. As a result, local authorities are adding additional water filtration systems, closing contaminated wells, or providing bottled water to people with costs often paid by residents through their water rates, not by companies whose products contaminated the water. Greta, you've done a ton of PFAS reporting. What do you make of this call to action?
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, it feels like it's a reflection of the state legislature in Massachusetts, which is, well, we all know, takes a lot of time to pass laws compared to other states. In other ways, I don't know if the manufacturing banning it will help overall that much. You could see it that way too, because people buy stuff online from other places all the time. So, I mean, it's not like you wouldn't be able to obtain, a jacket or, it's often waterproofing for jackets or other things like that, a pan, whatever. You could still get it. So I don't know. I kind of see both sides.
It would be pretty complicated. And in the PFAS challenge is it's in makeup. It's in so many things that you wouldn't even necessarily expect. I think it was a month or so ago, there's a proposal, a bill that would ban PFAS in children's products like clothing and other things. And the point that Connor was making in his piece is that, these things get discarded in landfills. The PFAS can then run off into water supplies. Sometimes they're discharged directly from the manufacturer. So a variety of ways these are coming into the environment. They started being used, I think it was back in the 50s, as a convenience, right? It makes things water and stain and many things resistant. So it's a creature comfort for us humans, but it also has some impacts on human health. We saw Governor Healy a couple years ago, Paul, say, no more firefighters. This is not going to be in firefighting foam. This is not going to be in firefighters' gear. Has to be in effect by 2027. So incremental steps here, but do you see a broader ban taking place?
It's hard to fathom. So as Greta pointed out, it's hard to fathom sometimes what the legislature is doing. I don't know. I know what the trend in legislation in Beacon Hill seems to be now is that you take a policy and you attach it to a big bill. We just saw a jobs bill pass the House this week that has a whole bunch of stuff in it that you could argue has very little to do with job creation.
And that's the trend at the federal level, too.
Well, that was right, the one big, beautiful bill, but that has to do for different political reasons than the way they do it on Beacon Hill, which has a lot to do with transparency and urgency, which are issues that the legislature has struggled to deal with.
Yeah. If going back to those numbers, 176 public water systems in 99 cities and towns, if you look at the state map, most of those contaminated sites are focused in the eastern part of the state. Not to say that doesn't make it a dire situation, but it's just putting it in context here for Western Mass. Westfield has had an issue with this for years. Briefly, Mike, what are you watching in this?
Well, I think that this should be a no-brainer. This stuff is bad. Okay, it's bad. And in fact, Greta's comment is absolutely true, though, that even if we ban something here in the Commonwealth, someone who, if they want it enough, can get it online, which sort of leads to maybe we should have a national issue about this, a national ban. Just like, we've gotten rid of asbestos. Asbestos was ubiquitous in so many different industries and processes. It's time for this stuff to go.
PCBs.
We'll leave it there for now. My thanks to Greta Yoakum, Mike Dobbs, and Paul Tudhill for another great panel here on The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. Get out there and have a great Friday. Thanks for joining us on the radio and on YouTube. I'm Carrie Saldo.